I need you to concentrate. First, I'm gonna share with you some highlights on issues related to reading, and in particular to reading assessment from COMBI. Then we're going to take a look at chapter 4, which is about how to write specifications for tests. Remember that specifications are like the instructions that you write to design a test, either for you to design it later or for someone else to design it for you. Once we process these particular tables in chapter 4, 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, which you're gonna have to complete for your reading test, we start working on the considerations for assessing vocabulary and grammar within the context of reading, because that's what we wanna do. We wanna assess grammar in a meaningful way in the context of the reading passage. And finally, we'll process chapter 5 in CAR, which is actually how to select or how to create reading passages to design a test. And for homework, I have not decided yet what I'm gonna give you for homework for Holy Week. So I'm gonna leave it here as an unknown. Okay, so let's go ahead, take attendance, and we turn to COMBI's chapter 3. Let's see. Harlan Castillo, not here. Andrea Carolina Garcia Tapasco. Sebastián Gil.
Good morning, Professor.
Good morning. Laura Gomez. Laura is there. Laura Mejia.
Yeah, Professor. Good morning.
Good morning. Maria Fernandez here. Veronica Patiño. Hi there.
Good morning, Professor.
Good morning. Good morning. Harry Alejandro Rodriguez. No. Santiago Rosero. Kevin Sanchez is here.
Here, Professor.
Oh,
Profe,
Santiago,
falté
right.
yo.
¿Quién?
Geraldine Rodríguez.
Yo te llamé ya. Geraldine. Yes, te llamé ya. No,
Okay.
falta Harry Alejandro Rodriguez.
Yes, Professor, I'm here.
Oh, you are right. Great. Good morning. So let's see if Andrea Carolina joins us. Or Harley. Okay. So I'm going to take you through the process of how to write specifications in chapter 4. But I read in the reflections, many of you have confusions about what specifications are. So that I decided to process chapter 4 with you instead of assigning it as reading. I didn't assign it because I want to walk you through the whole chapter here today. But let me start with COMBI, which is really easy to process. So let's begin with COMBI chapter 3. So why reading assessment at times poses a great challenge? Because we cannot see what's going on in the person's head when they're reading. We don't know what kind of thought processes are going on. We don't know what connections they are making. So that's why we have to design assessments based on constructs or models of receptive skills. In other words, we have to provide a passage input to get the reader within a context that is meaningful, and design questions that are as close to the real world as possible. So we can kind of take that abstract notion of what goes on in a person's brain when they're reading to a more visible, practical level. There are different approaches to teaching reading and to assess reading. We go from folks who believe that you need to teach kids just to get the gist or the main ideas when they read, mainly taking information, or that we really need to aim for higher levels and is to get students to learn to synthesize, and that's taking it to a practical level, to be able to read and summarize what they read. So have the students demonstrate their ability to comprehend and also summarize. So there we're taking it to a productive level when we're asking kids to synthesize, summarize, or adults. That reading is a matter of decoding symbols to words or sentences, to form words or sentences. This approach is like going from the bottom, which is the most minimum unit of language, meaning of language, which is syllables. So some people for many years taught how to read just like that, starting with the sounds, matching sounds and letters, forming syllables, and then forming words. They thought that that was the way to start in the reading process, and it was called the phonics movement. Then that movement was challenged by folks who believe that kids and even adults that are illiterate have a much more successful process starting with the sentence level where there is meaning. So, and that's called top down. Top down is when you start teaching how to read from words and sentences and matching words with pictures and sentences as well as pictures. And you teach from the top to the bottom, which is matching letters and sounds. Oh, the opposite to what I just explained, which was the phonics movement. They believe on teaching from letter sounds to create words and sentences. Other people think that if a student cannot understand how different texts are constructed, different genre, they're not really taking reading to higher levels. Again, moving beyond just recognition of letters and sounds to being able to play with the text and say, well, the characteristics of this reading passage leads me to believe that this is a persuasive text. Also, there are people who consider that part of our reading instruction and assessment should include reading alternative passages such as advertisements, maps, graphs, cartoons, to make it more authentic. So you see, there's a wide range of philosophies or approaches to reading. And in my opinion, teaching reading and assessing reading should involve all of this. You cannot attempt to teach a person to read just from words and sentences if they never get to master letter sound association. They would always be stumbling with the pronunciation of words if they were not taught what this letter sounds like. And you can never get a person to really grasp the meaning of a passage if they're only focusing on letter sound association and pronouncing syllables. They will be focusing on those units as opposed to trying to make meaning. Does it make sense to you how we have these spectrums, this stream, phonics, and this other stream, which is called whole language, that you teach reading from the whole versus the parts, like is phonics? I think we need to do a little bit of everything from this spectrum, this side of the spectrum to this side of the spectrum. Because reading has a lot of sub skills. Take a look at the major reading skills and minor reading skills. I'm gonna ask for volunteers to read. Anybody? Starting with the major reading skills. We're gonna read all of them. Volunteers?
Sure, Professor. Major reading skills. Reading quickly to skim for gist, to scan for specific details, and establish overall organization of the passage.
Okay, that's kind of higher level thinking. Next person, thank you, Jennifer.
Reading carefully for main ideas, supporting details, author's argument and purpose, relationship of graphs of paragraphs, and fact versus opinion.
Again, you're taking the students to higher level thinking. I want you to be taking notes because these are all the constructs. These are all constructs that you can use to design your test. reading for scan for specific details, establish the organization of the passage, reading for main ideas. Okay, these are all examples of constructs. Another, thank you, Sebastian. Another person, please.
Information transfer from nonlinear text.
Nonlinear texts are the ones we just mentioned in the slide before, like advertisements, like maps. What else was there? Graphs, cartoons. Those are nonlinear texts because you know the structure. They go. They could go around. They could go this and this. Not exactly linear like a typical text. Thank you, Veronica. Another volunteer.
Drawing inferences from both stated and implied content.
Okay, drawing inferences, please take note on this because in all of your tests that you're going to design, I'm gonna require that you have at least one inference question. Because I'm a true believer that just because you're learning a language, you cannot be limited to thinking at higher levels. So we cannot underestimate students' capacity to make connections in their brains in a second language just simply because they are at a lower level of proficiency, okay? Everyone needs to have a construct on drawing inferences. Thank you, Laura. Another volunteer for minor reading skills.
Understanding at the sentence level, vocabulary, syntax, and cohesive markers.
What are cohesive markers? Come on, guys. You know cohesion in a text.
Conectores, profe.
Yes, connectores, and those of you who are taking academic writing with me, we now know that there are more than the typical transition words to connect sentences. We have this and these words as connectors and other structures that I'm teaching these folks to stay away from transition words. Another volunteer, please. Understanding.
Yes, Professor. Understanding at inter-sentence level, identifying what pronouns refer to, recognizing discourse markers.
Okay. We're getting to be more like a focus on the particular units of language forms, like grammar forms, and which is also legitimate. And a final reading skill.
Understanding components of nonlinear text, the meaning of graph, of chart labels, keys, labels, and the ability to find and interpret points.
Okay, very important to teach students how to read a map, how to read a graph. So all of these are potential constructs that you can keep in mind for this test that you're going to start designing. Vocabulary and grammar. Grammar and vocabulary are contextualized as part of reading passages instead of being assessed in isolation. However, there are times in which it's appropriate to assess vocabulary in isolation. There are times in which you can, because you want to know if the students were able to get the most important vocabulary items in a content-based class. So in that context, it's okay to assess vocabulary separately. But the main goal, really, we should always aim for incorporating grammar and vocabulary into our reading assessments. And writing specifications. Again, this is kind of like an abstract concept for some of you, but I want you to really have a clear understanding. Specifications help teachers and administrators establish a clear link between the objectives of your class, of your program, and the design of the assessment instruments. So when you're sitting down to designing a test, before you start writing the test, you have to think about what you've taught and the purpose of the test. So based on what you have taught, you design the purpose of the test, and based on the purpose of the test, you start making decisions about how am I going to structure this test, how many parts, what skills am I going to incorporate, what type of constructs then I will select, and for what and for each construct, what type of question am I going to design? So you have to think about the content. What material will the test cover? What does the student have to be able to do in terms of content? The conditions, specifications provide information about the structure of the test. You decide whether or not the students will have access to the text, if there's gonna be like an open book exam. You also make decisions on the criteria for grading. Specifications indicate how the assessment instrument will be marked or assessed. Questions about these basic notions of how to teach reading, top down, or bottom up. Let me ask you this. Did you, in any of your classes, did you hear about these two opposing viewpoints for teaching reading? Top down, bottom up, phonics versus whole language?
Yes, Professor.
No? Yes, Sebastian, in what class?
I think it was in third semester where I had a presentation about that, about it top down and bottom up, general to specific and specific to general. It was also there. That is what I remember.
Okay.
It's quite similar.
I do think that you as future English teachers have to keep this in mind, that you need to address bottom-up issues such as letter-sound association, the formation of syllables, and from syllables how to form words, because some learners learn how to read from bottom up, but you also have to consider that there is another way to approach reading instruction, which is top down. You start from the big picture to the minute units of language. Big picture meaning sentences and words. And some learners that are holistic learners have more success learning to read from top down versus bottom up. So keep that in mind, that there are two approaches: bottom up phonics instruction, top down whole language instruction. Excuse me. Okay, so now that we mentioned specifications as the instructions for designing the test, and we have to think about content, we have to think about the overall test structure and the design of each of the items, I want to turn your attention to Nathan Carr's chapter 4. And if I'm going too fast, I need you to slow me down, because I'm a reading specialist, and I love this notion of teaching reading, and I get really excited, and I just lose track of whether or not you guys are following. So please let me know. So writing the specifications for individual tests. So what are we doing here? We're starting to think about three aspects before writing the test. Number one, what is the context and what is the purpose? What is the context refers to the curriculum, the program, your program content objectives and language objectives. And that leads me to write up the purpose, to identify the purpose of my test. Then I have to think about the test structure. Well, if my purpose is to assess what we've been working on in the last 2 months in this period in terms of test structure, identifying main ideas in paragraphs, as well as reading for details and being able to summarize. So based on those constructs, then I think, okay, well, I have quite a few constructs in mind. The purpose is to assess achievement over 2 months period. My test structure is gonna probably be 2 or 3 pages long, because I have about 4 constructs in mind. Once I think about, okay, I'm gonna have 2 or 3 pages long, how many parts am I going to have? I start thinking about, okay, for each of the parts, how many questions I have? And for each of the questions, how am I gonna design them? Are they going to be all multiple choice? Or am I gonna have like a true and false, another multiple choice, another one could be filling the gap? And if I'm working on summarizing, I might want to have like a extended response type of question. So that's what we think about before writing the test. The context, which relates to the curriculum that you have been working on, the purpose, which is achievement. If it's at the beginning of the year, it could be a diagnosis test. Then after that, my attention has to be on how am I going to structure this test, how many pages, how many parts, and how many questions per part. And then for each question, how am I going to design it? What type of question is going to be? So are you with me so far? Yes, make some noise,
Yes,
please.
Professor.
Yes,
Yes, Professor.
Okay, now I want you to keep this table in your mind because you're going to have to complete it for this reading assessment. You're going to give me the purpose and the construct definitions for the task. So taken from the overall test specifications, which were based on the context and purpose. So you're going to tell me what's the context of the test? What is it that you have been working on, the curriculum? So you have to give me the grade level, the proficiency level, and the purpose. And once you have the purpose, to list the constructs you're assessing. Okay, so I need you to think about context, purpose, and constructs that you're gonna assess. The description of the task, that deals with each of the questions that you're gonna have. So you're gonna have, based on the constructs, you're gonna have multiple choice. How many multiple choice? Well, I wanna tell you, this is a very limited test. It's not very long. I want you to have 3 questions. And I want you to have 1 multiple choice, 1 true and false, and 1 deletion or fill in the gap. I'm not gonna have you design a matching because those are very easy to design. I want you to really give it some thought to how to do a good fill in the gap question.
Professor, multiple choice, and what were the others?
True and false, and fill in the gap or
Thank you.
deletion. So in description of the task, you're gonna tell me, okay, I'm gonna have a multiple choice type of questions to assess this construct. I'm gonna have a true and false to assess this construct. And I'm gonna have a deletion or fill in the gap type of question to assess this construct. Is it clear?
yes,
Yeah,
Yes, Professor.
okay.
Yes, Professor.
I want you to think about your scoring method. So you're gonna have, for questions such as true and false, just how many points you're gonna assign that? Just 1 point because it's only 1 possible answer. For multiple choice questions, how many points you're going to assign? And if you have like a fill in the gap that requires 2 words, are you gonna give that question 2 points for 1 point for 1 word correct, or and 2 points for the 2 of them being correct? Okay, and keep in mind that for limited production tasks, like filling the gaps with 2 words or a sentence, you wanna provide an example. For 1 word responses such as true and false or multiple choice, you don't have to provide an example. But for limited production, you will have here, make a note that you have to come up with an example. We're not gonna do extended production responses here because we're assessing reading, remember? We're assessing a receptive skill. And in this part, sample task, since you made notice of that you need to have an example here, I want you to have, let's say, a multiple choice. No, I'm sorry. Here, example of each type of prompt, question, and reading passage. Yes, I know it's only 3 questions. I don't know if to have you write them here or just leave them for the test design. Let me think. It's only 3 questions, and I know it's going to be multiple choice, true and false. So you don't have to do this part. I'm going to make a note that you don't have to do the sample task. Okay? But you do have to complete the rest. Question, table 1, no need to include samples. Remember that we are writing this for, we pretend that this is for somebody else who's going to design the test. So that's why they ask the person who is writing the specifications to include a sample task. So the person can follow the lead. If this is how he or she is going to construct the multiple choice questions, we're provided a sample so the other person can continue to write more than one multiple choice question, because we're assuming that in a test, in a real test, there are more than 3 questions, okay? So for the real world, where you design more than 3 questions test, you provide a sample task. But for this exercise, you don't have to do it. Questions?
Yes, Professor, I have one. So when you ask about the whole, is that the difference between analytic and holistic? The scoring, that's my question.
Oh, for the, here in the scoring method, holistic and analytical ways to assess refer to rubrics that we use for writing or speaking. So you don't have to worry about that because we're not designing a writing or speaking task. All you have to design is how many points you're gonna give your multiple choice, your true and false, and your limited response, which is the fill in the gap or deletion, okay?
Thank you.
So regarding your specifications for each of the questions, you have to design on the construct, well, it's already given to you, which is reading, and the subconstruct. Remember, you need to have your subconstructs there, and you have to have one that is inferencing, okay? So out of those 3 questions that you're gonna have, one of them has to be designed to assess drawing inferences, okay? Different questions require different specifications, obviously. For your multiple choice questions, you need to have different specifications. You're gonna say, you have to think about how many options you're gonna have. 3 options, or you're gonna provide 4 options in a multiple choice. In your fill in the gap or deletion, am I gonna have like a closed passage with multiple deletions that are random or fixed deletions? Or am I gonna just have a limited response with just 1 word to fill in? Those are your decisions that you have to make in your specifications. In the scoring method, again, question-based tasks, like the ones that we're doing, short answer, multiple choice, you can decide on 2 points, and it's called dichotomous, or more than 2 points, which is polytomous. Like, for example, if you have the closed passage that you have 8 words, well, you have to think about giving 8 points to that question, as opposed to 2 points if you just have like a fill in the gap with just 2 words. And limited production, well, that's what I just told you. If it's only 2 words that you have to fill in, well, 2 points is okay. But if it's more, you need to have more, add more points, like in a closed passage where you have 8, 9, 10 words to fill in. Extended production task, that's when you use rubrics, and they could be analytical or holistic, like what Jennifer just asked, because you're assessing different constructs like vocabulary, spelling, grammar. So you need to have a rubric to score those. So for item based, I need you to learn this vocabulary, folks. In the question, the stem, it's the part where you pose the question. Okay, in multiple choice questions, the answer choices are your stems, because that's where the real question is there. For short answer, the stem is all there is. Let me explain this. You now know that the distractors are all the options, either the correct or incorrect, and the correct one is the key. We already have talked about that, the definition of a stem and the distractors and the key, right? We talked about it in another class. So I'm not going to spend time on that. I want you to process this table with me, because this tells you what you need to consider in each of the questions. Let's say that you're thinking about your multiple choice questions. So you have to decide whether your items are going to be in Spanish or English, depending on if it's a content-based lesson and the language is very complex. You may want to have some questions written in Spanish in order to assess whether or not the content was learned, if you're not assessing language. How long the item, stem, and the options are going to be, which vocabulary and grammatical structures are to be used. If you are working with A2 students, your questions cannot have grammar that is above A2 level, or the reading passage cannot be above A2. How many options you're going to provide in your multiple choice. And your true and false, again, whether or not you're going to use Spanish, could be that you can use Spanish for the instruction. Whether or not false items need to be corrected. Like you can tell the students, identify whether or not this is true and false, and if it's false, make it true. And if that's the case, well, you need to add more points to that question, because they already had 1 point for identifying whether or not it's true or false, and another point for making it correct. It's up to you. Again, how long the item stem and the options are going to be. Remember that you want to keep grammatical and syntactic consistency in your options, and which vocabulary and grammar structures are to be used. Very important not to use vocabulary or grammar that is higher than the proficiency level of the students. For matching questions, whether or not Spanish or English is used, how many distractors you're gonna have, again, how long the stems and the options should be, which vocabulary and grammar, and which parts of speech are to be used for one-word answers. And I'm not gonna process short answer yet, we'll process those when we do short answers, but for deletion-based tasks, what type of deletion you're gonna use? Fixed or rational? Remember, fixed deletion is that you're randomly deleting every 7th or 8th word. And you have to decide if it's like that, you're gonna delete every 8th or 7th word, how many words you're gonna delete in the whole passage. And depending on that, you assign a number of points that the question is worth. If you're gonna use this rational deletion, is like the one that you're thinking, okay, I'm going to delete all the adjectives to see if the student knows adjective placement, or I'm going to delete all the verbs to assess subject-verb agreement, or to have the student write them in the correct verb tense. So if you're making a rational decision on how to delete the words, you need to specify that in the instructions and the specifications. If it's gonna be random, the deletion of words, or if it's gonna be a rational decision. How many deletions? Yes.
Esas son las de filling the gaps.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because remember that there is a type of filling the gap that is longer, that you have a whole passage and you delete more than just 1 or 2 words. You delete a number of words, like 8, 9, 10 words. How long the text is going to be. With these longer deletion exercises, generally you leave the first 2 sentences intact. You don't delete any words. So the student can get context, okay? You have to make a decision if you're gonna leave 1 or 2 sentences, or maybe 3, depending on the complexity of the text, without deleting any words. And you have to decide whether multiple passages or only 1 passage can be used to reach the number of deletions to assess the reading comprehension constructs that you want to assess. To design these longer deletion exercises is fun. And they were very popular, I told you before, they were very popular ways to assess reading comprehension skills. And they are good to assess grammar and to assess vocabulary. Okay, these deletion, longer deletion exercises. Questions so far about this chart? Because you're going to have to complete it along with chart 4.1. This is chart table 4.2. You're going to have to design it, not design it, but you have to process it. And just, yeah, you have to tell me how long, how many options you're going to have in the multiple choice. For true and false, if you're going to make it just true and false, or if you're going to make the false correct. How many, the proficiency levels should match the grammar structure and the vocabulary. Should not be higher. Formation you don't have to worry about, and you have to tell me what type of deletion task you're gonna have. So yeah, keep the format of this table and just do it for multiple choice, true and false, and deletion. Okay, questions?
Professor, it will be then 3 questions of each or 3 per?
In total, 1 multiple choice, 1 true and false, and 1 deletion. Okay. Short answer question. I'm not gonna, well, yes, this applies to filling the gap as well. Require 1 or 2 pieces of information